Up next on C-SPAN, our guest on a live viewer call-in program is Senator James Exon from Nebraska. We'll look at a debate in the U.S. Senate to apply the principles of the War Powers Act to U.S. military action in the Persian Gulf. Senator Exon serves on the Armed Services Committee.
Senator James Exon, a Democrat of Nebraska. Should the War Powers Act apply to the Persian Gulf?
Yes, I think it should, Jim, for a lot of good reasons, but the main reason, of course, is the fact that the War Powers Act is the law of this land. And all of us, when we came here, took an oath of office to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and if we do not have a role to play, as the War Powers Act states, then we're not following the oath that we took when we became part of the most deliberative body in the world, the United States Senate.
Tell us what exactly would the War Powers Act do?
Well, essentially, Jim, I guess most people know that the War Powers Act grew out of the Vietnam War, because we found ourselves in a situation where we had a series of wars, where a war was never declared by the Congress of the United States as provided for in the Constitution. So Senator Jacob Javits and others that were most concerned about our involvement in Vietnam, without ever a formal approval of that action, brought on the War Powers Act. It simply says that the President of the United States, in discharging his responsibilities as the Commander-in-Chief, has the right to do anything that he feels necessary to protect the vital interests of the United States of America. It says, though, that any time that a president sends any of our forces into an area where, quote, imminent hostilities, end quote, are likely, he has the obligation to so notify the Congress of the United States as to what he is doing. At that time, a 60-day period takes place, or it starts ticking away, so to speak. At the end of that 60-day period, the Congress of the United States then gets involved, and the Congress of the United States can either declare war, it can tell the President of the United States that the actions are not proper, and in that case, the troops and the forces that the President has sent out under the authority that he has would have to be removed, or the Congress of the United States could say, we do not wish to make a final determination on this at the present time, and you may go ahead, Mr. President, with the actions that you have taken. So it doesn't foreclose any and all options, and I think the War Powers Act is a good one, because it not only brings the Congress in to the responsibility for involving this nation in wars around the world, but also it helps the President, because it forces the Congress of the United States not just to sit back on the sidelines and say, well, go ahead, and then if we don't like what you do, Mr. President, we can criticize you. What the War Powers Act is designed to do is to involve the Chief Executive Officer, the President, with the Congress in making these important decisions on peace or war.
Is there a conflict here between the President's right and duty, actually, to conduct foreign policy versus congressional interference, perhaps, here?
Well, that's been alleged, Jim, and that might be that some of his rights have been abridged. On the other hand, the Constitution clearly says that only the Congress can declare war. And I think there's something wrong with a system that worked as it did in Vietnam, where we had a major war on our hands without the Congress ever making the declaration that it is required to make if we're going to expend lives and money in a war conducted by the United States of America. So it has been alleged that the War Powers Act is a constitutional violation of the prerogatives of the President. That has never been tested in the Supreme Court. And since that is something that clouds this whole issue, I would hope that some appropriate time it might be tested. No one has seemed to want to test it in the courts, either in the executive or the legislative branch.
Our topic tonight is the Persian Gulf and the War Powers Act. Our guest is Senator James Exon, a Democrat of Nebraska. He was elected in 1978, and he is on the Armed Services Committee, and he is chairman of the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces and Nuclear Deterrence. And he was governor of Nebraska from 1971 to 1979. We'll be taking your calls in just a few moments. The numbers will be listed throughout the show at the bottom of the screen. And Senator, I might add that we usually take a while to get calls, but the phones are pretty well lit up already. My first question is, why did you push this now when the ships have been in the Persian Gulf for quite some time, or is this just coming to the floor?
Well, I don't think anyone is pushing this now. The facts of the matter are that we are obviously involved in a area where hostilities obviously threaten the lives of American men and women who are performing the duties that they're supposed to perform over there under the direction of the President. The question is, should the Congress continue to ignore its responsibilities and just sit back and say, well, Mr. President, you go ahead and do what you want? So I think that kind of begs the question, Jim, as to whether or not we think we are a nation of laws, or whether we are a nation that's going to go along and continue to fly by the seat of our pants, so to speak, with regard to the issues of the critical issues of war and peace and the involvement of the might of America around the world and become involved in hostilities.
Senator, our first call is from Phoenix, Arizona. You're on the line.
Yes, sir. Senator Exon?
Yes.
Sir, I would like to ask you a question. Okay?
Certainly.
Let me turn my TV on. We went into Korea. We went into Vietnam under the United Nations, or not Korea, but and then we went under Vietnam under the democratic system and that. And we got this country all tore up.
And we got what?
We got this country all tore up.
Right.
Over constitutional issues. And we're still debating them year after year after year. Of what is going on between the President of the United States and the Senate of the United States, of who controls this government. And I think the primary question is, the people control this government, not the President, not the senators, not the representatives of the House, but the people of the United States. And these are the people that have to make the decision through our elected representatives, and they have to express their opinion through all of these people in a common consensus.
I'd like to jump in here and let the Senator respond.
Well, I don't agree with anything that the caller said. I think he put it very well, and that is a process that's going on here. I would simply say, as a matter of clarification, that this is not an issue between this Congress and this President. Every President of the United States, going back to the time when the War Powers Act was passed, when Richard Nixon was President of the United States, that President, President Nixon, vetoed the War Powers Act. It was passed over his veto. And every President, Democrat and Republican, since Richard Nixon, has objected to the War Powers Act and has maintained that it is unconstitutional. I certainly thought it was very wise that the caller that just asked me a question pointed out that the people are the ones who should be making these decisions. The people elect the President of the United States to represent them in the executive branch. The people elect members of the United States Senate, members of the House of Representatives to represent them in the House and the Senate. All that we do here, we're an extension of the people of the United States. My main constituency, of course, are the same people that I represented for 8 years back in Nebraska as governor. Now I am an extension of the people of Nebraska here in the United States Senate. So there's no way that we can have a representative government, which I think we have and which has served us quite well, without some of the decisions being passed along through the support of and through the suggestion of the people of the United States. And I believe if you look at the polls that have been run, you will see, number one, that the people of the United States generally support the action of the Reagan administration in the Gulf. There is some opposition, and there's always going to be differences of opinion. But at the same time, the same people that support that action say that the Congress of the United States should speak on this issue and should be part and parcel of the decisions that are going to be made tomorrow and the next day and the day after that with regard to extension of the military might of the United States, and not leave this up just to the President alone.
Our next call is from Tidewater, Newport News, Virginia. Go right ahead.
Yes, old buddy, I just wanted to ask the Senator one question. When you send a man to one of the embassies in the Far East, whose protection is he under? The senators or under the president?
He is under the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States. That's what the Constitution provides, and that's the way it should be.
Senator, when the government not too long ago decided to pay or give additional pay to our servicemen and women in that area, did that make a difference in your argument?
It didn't make any difference in my argument except to fortify it that much further. Basically, what the President did, of course, through the Secretary of Defense, is to say that the men and women who are serving in the Persian Gulf area are under additional danger, and therefore they're entitled to additional pay. The President has the right to do that under the law, and I think that was an important step in the right direction. I think, though, that buttresses the argument that those of us are making here, that indeed we are involved in an area there where the perils of the people that are serving there are very serious, and that they are at risk, and that therefore the Congress of the United States should have to take a stand one way or the other as to whether or not they are for the action that is going on there, and not duck and say, well, it's none of our doing. It's all of our doing, and any time the United States of America become involved in a war, it should be the responsibility of all of the people through their congressmen and senators to become involved also to make sure that our constitutional and representative form of government continues to work.
Let's go to Tulare, California. You're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to know, like with this War Powers Act, it seems like whenever the president tries to do anything, the Congress is always tying his hands, and I don't see how that it's really necessary. If the situation comes up where the Senate thinks that, we're in a dangerous situation, it seems like that you could just bring up a vote then and there instead of have this War Powers Act where it seems like it makes the president weaker, and that doesn't benefit our country, in my point of view. And what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a legitimate argument that can be advanced. I guess it comes back to the situation as to whether or not we're going to follow the Constitution and the laws of the land, or whether under individual circumstances we're going to let the president make all the decisions. There isn't any question but what a dictatorship is the most efficient form of government. So a dictator or a monarch in days past, and as history has shown us, both history from many years back and recent history with the Adolf Hitlers of the world in World War II, they make the decision and the people go along. When this country was founded, it was founded by some very wise people that did not want a monarch. They did not want a dictator. They wanted a strong presidency, but they wanted checks and balances on the presidency to make sure that the president did not become a dictator or a monarch. So I think that the suggestion or argument that this caller advanced is one that I've heard before. The only thing I would remind him and others is that that is not the way that this government was formed or has functioned. And if you're going to give the president unlimited authority to start wars or risk wars any place in the world, you are giving the President of the United States an authority not granted him by the Constitution and the founding fathers of this nation.
Let's go to Vero Beach, Florida. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. Senator.
Yes.
One thing I've noticed in listening to the Congress in the United States, I agree with you about the checks and balances, but I think the big problem is that in the past, or since Vietnam, and I did go to Vietnam, I think that it's gotten so political that if it's a Republican president, you Democrats don't agree with anything that he does, whether it be Contras, whether it be the Persian Gulf, whatever it is, that you can't make up your mind what you want to do. And I think America needs to, I think it's about time that when we say we're going to do something, that we do it. I mean, we got allies, we have commitments, and if we don't do it, I mean, when we talk right now, our adversaries laugh because they know we're not going to do anything. And I think we better start coming across with a strong military. I think we need to do what we say we're going to do. If we're going to tell these people we're going to help them, then by gosh, I think we ought to help them. And I think the politics have gotten so enstrangled in everything that we're trying to do that if it's a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, then it's wrong. But I think that the biggest thing you have to do now is to get together. And I don't agree with this War Powers Act. I think that, and I don't agree with it because of the politics that are involved. I think that if the president is going to ensure free water rights in the Persian Gulf, and he says we're going to defend it, and I think, by gosh, we ought to defend it. I think that our commanders in these ships ought to know what their orders are instead of sitting there and not. I'm a police officer, and the biggest thing we got going today is that nobody wants to give you any kind of policy about what you can do if something happens. In other words, yeah, you can shoot if they shoot at you first. Now that is ridiculous. I think if we send our people over there, then we ought to protect our people and let them have carte blanche, whatever those commanders, because after all, a commander is put there by his experience, and if he thinks it needs to be done, it ought to be done, and not be worrying about what's going to happen to him if he makes the wrong decision.
Caller, let me jump in here and let Senator respond.
Well, I agree completely with the basic thrust of this caller's statement, and that is that when the United States of America moves, it should move. It should move in full power. It should move with the constitutional authority of the United States. It should move with a strong president, which I think Ronald Reagan is exhibiting in this area. I oftentimes feel that there is entirely too much Democrat versus Republican. As has been said before, there are too many Democratic United States senators and there are too many Republican United States senators and not enough United States senators. Let me correct you on what I presume is your impression of what this senator, this Democratic senator, would do. I feel that we have to follow the law of the land. You say that the War Powers Act is something that we should not have. That may well be true. Then why don't we vote in the United States Senate to either repeal the War Powers Act, that would solve the immediate problem. If we didn't have the War Powers Act, then some people feel the President of the United States should be able to do anything that he wants around the world without consultation with the other elective people of the United States, of members of the House and Senate. Let me get back, if I might, Jim, to the Democrat-Republican issue. If I had to vote today, and I know something about this, I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee and the chairman of the Strategic Deterrent Committee, which has to do with all of our nuclear deterrents around this whole world. If I had to vote today, I would vote to keep the force that we have in the Persian Gulf there as it is today. But I think some improvements need to be made. And I think that the President, when he went in there, should have had and simultaneously gotten the much more support from the Japanese, who get most of the oil that we're ensuring comes out of that Gulf. I think the President should have insisted on much more help than we're getting from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and the other people that are Arab friends of ours that are trying to bring some peace to that part of the world. How ludicrous is it that Kuwait will not give us landing rights for our helicopters and our aircraft that are there to protect our men and women on those ships and to help sweep mines laid by Iran in the Persian Gulf. Now, I say to you that if we're going over there full scale, let's go. I think we should also expect much more help than we're getting from Japan. We should be getting much more help than we're getting from our European allies. Unfortunately, they are the ones that get about 85% of the oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf that we're protecting. Now, we're a superpower. I say we have a legitimate interest there in the interest of overall world peace. But I don't believe that this whole matter has been handled to the fullest extent that I think to protect our men and women. And we've lost some lives over there that we may have lost anyway. But I simply agree with you. If we're going to go in with all our power. And that includes the power and might to our friends and our allies, and certainly the adjacent Arab states who have been less than fully cooperative with regard to landing our aircraft on their shores.
Let's go to the West Coast. Berkeley, California. You're next.
Hello. I'd like to know what the term American interest means. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was drafted at the age of 19, sent off to protect American interests. What does that mean?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. I guess I asked that question myself a few years back when I went off to World War II and spent 2 years in the South Pacific. American interest means that there are only two superpowers in the world today, the United States and the Soviet Union. And there are many other important countries, but those are the two superpowers. American interests then become not only America's immediate personal interests, but the whole interest of the free world. We have a responsibility as a world leader in that particular area, and we simply cannot afford to cut and run every time we are challenged militarily or economically, directly or indirectly around the world. So I'm a Democrat. I'm generally referred to as a hawk. I'm not sure I am a hawk, but that's what I'm called, because everything today you see is black or white, true or false. There are all kinds of shades of political opinion here, and that's what makes this nation great. And when people criticize about Republicans and Democrats and Republicans, I suppose partisan politics does play more of a role than it should. But I want to tell you that in my view, 17 years in public office as a Democrat from a highly Republican state, I think that there is more understanding, there is more bipartisanship, especially when we come to foreign affairs that is generally painted by the news media.
I'd like to explain to our viewers why Senator Exon is not in our studio. Instead, he is up live in our Senate C-SPAN studio just off the Senate floor, because the Senate is still in session, in a rare Friday night session.
We're in here tonight. We're going to be in here tomorrow. We have a rare weekend session because we're trying to get through the Defense Authorization Bill, which has to do with authorizing all the money for all of our national defense. And we have about 140 amendments on the bill that we reported out of our Armed Services Committee. It's a very lengthy, time-consuming process, but when you're here, a part of the supposedly most deliberative body in the world, we are pretty deliberative, and it takes a long time to work through these things. But again, that's part of the process, and we're not complaining because all of us knew what the life was here when we ran very hard for these positions.
We should add that the War Powers Act is an amendment that you'll be offering on the bill?
I am not offering it, but it's being offered by...
Senator Byrd is offering?
Senator Byrd, the majority leader, will be offering it. It's backed by myself and many other Democrats and Republicans that are all over the lot on the political philosophy. I think the basic theme is what I've expressed earlier. If we have this on the books, then we should uphold the laws of the land as we expect all other citizens to do in their daily activities.
Our next call in the Persian Gulf is from Richmond, Virginia. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much. Senator, I just want to call as one who's not right or left. I'm pretty much moderate. I voted for Republicans and Democrats. I don't believe that everything Ronald Reagan does is correct. But I will say I'm very concerned. I think a lot of people are here just across America with a lot of the over-involvement and I think the political involvement of the Senate, the Congress, with the presidency. I see that not only in the War Powers Act, which I think is unconstitutional and could lead to a real constitutional dilemma if you force his hand and then he forces your hand back. What are you going to do? There's going to be a stalemate. You're going to say you must do this or that. He's going to say no, I'm not, and we're going to be in trouble. I voted for our senators here, Warner and Tribble, both of them, but I did not vote for them to run the military. It is not a dictatorial thing. President Reagan or whoever is in the presidency is elected by the people, and part of the package that comes with that is our understanding that he is the commander-in-chief, and we trust him. That's why we voted for him in part. I see a lot that bothers me not only with this, but this whole Bork thing where a president's hand is being tied unless you can find something just tremendously out of line with Bork or a lot of these matters. This is something that's the president's legitimate right to perform. And a lot of us out here, and I watch C-SPAN, I appreciate all the hours that I've watched the Bork hearings, and it's upsetting to me, although the process I agree with. I think it's tremendous, but let the president we voted for run it.
Thank you, Carl. Let me jump in and let the Senator respond.
Well, first, Jim, I want to respond to thank C-SPAN. The fact that they're carrying the hearings on Judge Bork and the confirmation, is a tremendous service to the people of these United States. And were not for C-SPAN, you couldn't see all of those things. And I appreciate the people being informed on that. Well, the present caller is taking about the same position of some of the other callers tonight that says we elected President Reagan. We not only elected him President of the United States, we elected him king. And he has the right to do anything that he wants. And the confirmation process and the constitutional process that says that only the Congress of the United States can declare war, don't pay attention to that. Because that doesn't suit us in these particular times. I think the Constitution serves us all well. On Judge Bork, I have not made up my mind on Judge Bork. You don't know my record, but I think with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions, I voted for to confirm every major appointment that has come from the President of the United States that requires Senate confirmation, and there have been hundreds of them. So most of us do not play politics on these matters. Certainly there have been enough questions raised about Judge Bork that I think it requires us in our confirmation process to look into his basic qualifications. It's my view that Judge Bork has impeccable qualifications. From the standpoint of his basic legal training, background, and the fact that he's a member of the judiciary now. I guess the question that you're asking me or suggesting is that regardless of what one Senator Exon thinks about this, he has a right to rubber stamp, or he has an obligation to rubber stamp every person that the President of the United States sends up for confirmation. If that were the case, then we had best do away with the confirmation process in toto. This afternoon, in the floor of the United States Senate, right downstairs, the United States confirmed by a vote of 90-0 the President's nomination of Judge Sessions to be the new director of the FBI. Not a single vote against him. There was not any votes against him in the committee. You know, I guess that what I hear from some of these callers saying is that we don't like representative forms of government. We don't like the checks and balances right now because we think Ronald Reagan is doing the right thing. I'm not saying that Ronald Reagan is doing the wrong thing, but I think that there is a requirement here that we follow the procedures that have been pretty good to this country and all of us for well over 200 years, and let's keep them in place.
Let's go back out to the West Coast. Los Angeles, you're up next.
Yes, I want to say that Senator Exon, what you just said is in tune with the Constitution of this country and in tune with the Founding Fathers. In 1980 and 84, we did not elect a dictator. We elected a president who is bound, as the Founding Fathers said, by the chains of the Constitution. Now, in regard to those dictator lovers who want to do away with the Constitution, I'd like to point out Article 1, Section 8 specifically says that the Congress, not the President, the Congress shall have the power to declare war. There is nothing in it that says that the President may have the power to declare war. The War Powers Act, if anything, is a weak reed against the President. I think that we need a strengthened War Powers Act, but we certainly should not do away with the concept which is in keeping with the Constitution. In regard to Bork, I'd like to point out...
Excuse me, Carl. I'd like to jump in here and just let the Senator respond to Persian Gulf because we've got a lot of calls waiting and we'd like to try to stay to the subject matter. Senator, could you respond to the Persian Gulf?
Well, I think what this caller has just stated is basically the constitutional line that I have been stating on this program since we started, and I don't disagree with anything that he has said. I would simply point out again that all presidents have felt that the War Powers Act was unconstitutional. If that was the case, I can't understand why they didn't begin to take legal action to have that decision made by the Supreme Court. We are a law of land. We are a land of laws, I meant to say. And the third branch of government that we have, in addition to the executive and the legislative, is the judicial branch. That's what we have a Supreme Court for, and that's why we have all of the dear and very special parts of the United States of America and the government that was founded here over 2 years ago. I think it's something to be proud of, and I, for one, look a little bit askance at us taking shortcuts to go around the Constitution that, with all its faults and with all the faults that this government, this form of government has, it's the best one that anyone ever invented, and I'm going to work to keep it that way.
Let's go just up I-95 to Baltimore. You're next.
Yes, I'd just like to say I really like your program.
Thank you.
I say what bothers me is the way people are saying the president should be able to do what he wants to do and the Congress should stay out. I think unless we think our founding fathers pretty stupid or didn't know what they were doing in setting up the Constitution, they gave the Congress the right to dispose of our nation's most prized resources, our young men and women, and our material wealth. And I think they would want the Congress informed thoroughly and involved in decision-making to a certain extent. And I agree with our position on staying in the Gulf, but I think our elected representatives should be involved in the process. That's what we elect them for, to represent us in government. And I'd just like to say I'm really shocked at the way people watched your program last night just saying the Congress should stay out and the president should be able to do what he wants to do. I don't want that. As you said, Congressman, this isn't a monarchy or a kingdom. This is a representative form of government. And I think our representatives should be involved thoroughly, like the way our founding fathers probably wanted them to be, in my opinion.
Thank you, caller.
Just let me answer that with a very short statement. Amen.
Very short. Vancouver, Washington, you're next.
Yes, and as usual, I hear a true politician in all his double talk. you speak a lot of the Constitution and laws, and, you know, we also have a constitutional obligation not to obey any unconstitutional laws. And I can tell you why the War Powers Act is unconstitutional. Because as a senator, I have nothing to say about what you might do. My own representative, I could vote him out of office. But you're from Nebraska, and I have absolutely no control over what you might do. You are elected to represent your people in Washington, not in the Persian Gulf. When the president comes to you and tells you, as our elected official, that there's a problem, then the Constitution brings you in. But not until then. Thank you.
Well, let me make a short statement, respond to that. I just don't agree with the lady, but she has a right to her opinion.
Let's go down to Coral Gables, Florida. You're on the air.
Hello, Senator Exon.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you a question about how come the Democrats, the news media, aren't bringing out the fact that President Reagan's policy in the Persian Gulf is working rather well.
Well, I think the policies in the Persian Gulf are working pretty well, and I think I specifically said that a few moments ago. Too many of these calls, Jim, reflect what I think the news media has built up. Sometimes, unfortunately, you know, us against them, Democrats against Republicans. It just doesn't play that way here, but I know that grabs headlines, and sometimes that's what people like to think. We try very hard to represent, number one, our constituencies here, and some of the criticisms that I've heard tonight indicate to me that some people in the United States just think we ought to have a constitutional convention and do away with the Constitution and start all over again. Maybe that's a good idea. I don't agree with that, and I suspect that the majority of the people of the United States do not.
Senator, is there any agreement on exactly when the War Powers Act amendment, Senator Byrd's amendment, will come up?
There was just a unanimous consent agreement, Jim, within the last hour on the floor of the United States Senate, tying up all of these amendments, loose ends that we have, amendments to the Defense Authorization Bill. The War Powers Act amendment by Senator Byrd, and also the controversy about the interpretation of the SALT II Treaty were set aside, so to speak, and were not included in that unanimous consent agreement. That means that since we are going to finish all of the amendments on this bill by Tuesday night, except for the War Powers Act and the interpretation of the SALT II Treaty, that means that that amendment will not come up before next Wednesday at the earliest. I suspect that in the end we will have some kind of an agreement here, as we usually have when we hammer these things out between the majority and the minority. I suspect that in the end the War Powers Act proposition will not be included in the as an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill, but an agreement will be reached to take that up immediately after we pass the Defense Authorization Bill, because that is too important a bill to have it tied up on a filibuster, which I think is very likely to happen. And if a filibuster starts, it's going to tie up the Defense Authorization Bill and the money for the defense of the United States beyond a time when we can afford it.
Well, Senator, we are just about out of time. We'll take one more call. Portland, Oregon. You're on the air.
Yes. I don't think that the Congress, I think they should be setting domestic policy and leaving the president and all the people running and knowing the inside, everything that's going on, letting them make a decision. Because, for example, now a 2-year moratorium on missile testing, which is what the Russians want, so they continue with their space program and their Star Wars program in space. They want a moratorium, and what happens is if they cheat again, which they've cheated on every treaty, then when we confront them, then we have another problem, a Cold War. And also, secondly, on the Time Magazine, September 14th article on Keith Glennon, the man who got NASA running. Now, he says that the Russians have 13 years logged in space, while we have only 4 years, and that they have reported that after 250 miles up in space, they are so attuned that they can see with the naked eye ships at sea, tanks gathering on a field, and even submarines under the surface of some ocean areas. So if we are going to get rid of the Pershing IIs in Germany and then depend on the utilization of the submarines for this purpose, I think that we should very much question this, and I think you should get together with the president before you continue to make foreign policy and make these issues for the president deciding on treaties.
Thank you, caller. Excuse me, we're just about out of time. I'd like to let the senator respond.
Well, first, I think the lady made some good points. I'm not going to get into some of the areas that she talked about. Many of them are highly classified and something that I cannot comment on over the air. There is a concern about the Soviet Union. There's a continuing threat from them. I would simply say to her that this senator led and managed the defeat of the amendment on the floor the day before yesterday that would have restricted beyond any reasonable bounds our testing of our nuclear stockpiles. I led the battle for President Reagan and for the administration. It was a 50-50 tie vote, as you probably know. Unfortunately, the Vice President of the United States was here to cast the deciding vote in our favor. That's democracy in action. That's the Democrats and Republicans and the President and the Congress and the United States Senate working together. Let's keep it that way.
Senator J. James Exon, a Democrat of Nebraska, thank you very much for being with us
tonight.
Thank
you, Jim.
And thank you for your calls. Good night.
Up-to-the-minute schedule information on C-SPAN, we invite you to call our 24-hour schedule information phone line. The number is 202-628-2205 for C-SPAN program schedule information 24 hours a day. That's 202-628-2205.